too long, we're not coming back, and so on. So we actually engaged a company to process map the whole exercise. People were waiting 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, depending on the numbers waiting to donate. And our objective was 95% of people will be actually in and out in an hour. That was our objective of the exercise. We process mapped it, and we got together 34 staff over 4 days, and we asked them to talk to us about the process. And we actually presented the process map of the whole process, from the person walking in the door, leaving the door on the other end. They just could not believe how long it took. But what more they couldn't believe was the amount of time we actually interacted with that donor. The donor could be there 2 hours, but we might have only interacted about 28 minutes in terms of one-to-one interaction. And they just couldn't believe it because they were involved in one process and they never knew what happened in the next process or the next process or the next process. And they say, God, that has to change. The donors will not come back for that kind of reason. They just won't wait any longer. So we devised a future process map of the clinic and how it would look and so on. And we communicated to everybody. And we had it done in 3 phases. And we implemented the first phase and we got resistance. And we're saying, we communicated what we're trying to achieve. We said, what's all this resistance about? And we sat back and analysed it afterwards. What happened was we communicated the corporate message, what we were trying to achieve as an organisation for the benefit of the donor. But for the individual staff member on the clinic, whether they be a nurse or whatever, we didn't tell them actually what was it going to mean for me. How is my work going to change? How my responsibility is going to change? How my role going to change? And then we're getting resistance on those areas. So the next phase, which is phase 2, we then went down to the personal level. And actually the message was received much better. And we got still some resistance because they were impacting on people's pay now. But still they understood exactly what we were trying to do, what it meant for them, and how we wanted them to change. But certainly we learned from the first one the purely corporate message. And we thought we'd done a fantastic job. And all the diagrams and all the communication, and we rehearsed this and so on, and we just didn't get the message through, and which meant we weren't communicating to an individual. And as we all know, change begins with me, and it impacts on me personally. So you have to get the message to the person involved.
That's interesting. So when you started off the first day planning it out, did it not kind of occur to you that, look, this is going to have to be, people going home this evening are going to have to figure out what the hell this means to me?
Yeah, we did, I suppose. We thought through the process mapping exercise which they were involved with.
Yeah.
And we put up those in all the centres, every part they played. So we thought they understood what was happening, why we needed to change. And they all agreed, yes, we can't do waiting this long, it just is not going to work anymore. And we thought, okay, but we didn't translate that then into, okay, how does it impact on the person? And I suppose assumed a certain amount of knowledge and about the impact they had that they didn't have. And we didn't go there. And we thought we did, I know it seems very obvious now, we thought we presented a wonderful presentation. To us it was really clear what we were trying to achieve. Yeah. But actually it wasn't telling the donor attendant or the nurse or the driver, clerk, how was my role going to change? What was it going to mean to me on a clinic tonight in Ballina or Swinford or whatever? Yeah. And we missed that bit. It sounds glaringly obvious now. But
and Andy, you're saying we. I mean, did your managers buy into the change, and what role did they play in?
Yeah, the managers bought into it, but right. They didn't communicate to the level we needed to communicate.
Right.
And also, I think perhaps the supervisors at the clinic level hadn't fully bought into it because their role was changing substantially, and we asked them to take on more managerial responsibility for the operation of the clinic. Perhaps we didn't clear that up significantly. So what we did then was we went back and said, okay, this is coming through as an issue for us. We need to sit down with all these people who have a management role within the clinic and clarify absolutely the roles and responsibilities they have.
And had you set timescales? Had you decided we need to have this achieved by X, this achieved
by...
We
did, yeah. And we didn't make the first one.
You didn't make the first one?
No, we didn't.
And what would you put that down to?
Basically, we didn't communicate the message properly.
Right.
And we ran into resistance where we didn't expect it. And of course, then because there are 8 teams around the country, we had to communicate the whole lot again to 8 different teams. And we wanted to implement a change on a piecemeal basis to make sure that there would be no impact on safety and so on. So it timelined way out of sync. Second and third phase was much better.
Right.
Because we now were dealing with the people directly. We did it one team at a time. We spoke to everybody, what is going to impact on you personally, at the bed, at the clinic reception or whatever. And it was much, much better.
Can I ask you, Andy, had you thought through, when you say roles had to change and all the rest of it, had you thought through in your planning to the level of detail around the specifics in terms of how somebody was going to, how their role was going to be altered? Had you done that level of detail?
We had actually, surprisingly we had.
Yeah.
And I think what we did is, I suppose as senior managers was, we assumed things were happening on the ground because that was the role we thought the person had. But in fact what had happened was their roles on a local basis had changed slightly. Yeah. So if you visited the 8 teams, you would have seen the same role be done differently in eight times in the different teams. And we weren't fully aware of that. The job was being done, but a slightly different way and different emphasis in different places.
Different nuance.
Yeah, and we were trying to standardise it and make it consistent.
Yeah.
And so therefore we were sort of bringing change that we thought were actually quite simple. But in fact, because they had got to a different model which worked for them, locally, because of different circumstances, we found greater resistance and we had to revisit that.
Right, okay.
And that was a big issue for us.
When you look at the conduits that you use to get your message out, Andy, during that, could you just, for somebody who's planning to do this at the moment, I think the first lesson that they've learned from what you're talking about there is it's all about the individual changing what they do and the implications for them. So that's the start and finish of it, really.
Yeah.
But looking at how you get that information to people over a protracted period of time, how do you manage to reinforce it and all that? How did you go about that, the mechanics of that?
I think what we did was we prepared a briefing for the senior management team of the change program first. Then we did it to the next level down, which were the managers directly involved in running the teams in the local areas, to get them on board and to explain to them what we're trying to achieve. And I think, reflecting on it now, I think perhaps that even for them to go back and communicate message to their staff, we weren't giving them enough detail, because they could see what we're trying to achieve from their perspective, what they were being asked to do. But actually, for them then to go back and talk to Mary or to John, and they say, look, well, and what's our role going to be? How are we going to change? We weren't giving them enough information to explain on a one-to-one basis with their team, who they knew very well, what was meaning for them. And so they were left in a difficult situation, which by us really, not giving them the knowledge and the information to pass on to the people. So I think what you have to do is you've got to be very clear. I think I actually said earlier, you've got to be very clear what you're trying to achieve, communicate it in the detail, and communicate it to the people who are actually going to communicate it down to the people who are going to matter on the ground.
When you're doing that,
you missed that step really.
Yeah, but also that I think it's all of our experience that every time you have a layer moving down, to try and ensure that layer is all on the one message as it's moving down. Certainly, one of the things that we've done certainly in the past, where you've got that in a larger organisation, we've got a layer down and layer down. What we've done, I don't know if you did this, Andy, is we get, say for instance, that layer, and we're saying, okay. At the top layer, people say, okay, that's what we're telling you. Can you feed back to us what your understanding of that is in your context before you tell our people? So they come back. So if you're the CEO and you tell us what your message is, and we're the guys on the next level, then we come back to you and we say, here's what we're hearing you saying, Andy, and here's what it means for my people. Now we all know we're on the same tack. Next layer goes down and we get them to present back to us. To say, here's what I'm hearing from what you're saying and how I'm translating that for your next. So you have this kind of wave effect. It goes down, but it comes back up again before it goes down. And we found that worked really well in an organisation that we were working with, because it just meant there was no chance of ambiguity. It was amazing though when people started feeding back, here's what I heard.
Yes.
No, it is amazing. When you see you have 5-6 people in a room.
We didn't do that level of sophistication, which we learned afterwards. And we did it. I suppose the other thing that came out of all this for us was that we realised, I think it's the point Mick made earlier, that our managers, many of them were promoted on a technical competence, not on a managerial ability. And what came out for us was a huge need for a significant training and development initiative. And we undertook that subsequently. You might say to me, well, why didn't we do that first? I suppose it didn't come out to us that actually they weren't capable of doing this initially, and we learned through that exercise, I suppose. And perhaps that's what you need to do. Maybe perhaps what we do now, if we're doing it again, is assess our management competency and capacity to deliver on the change we're actually asking them to do before we do it.
Because I think we find that a lot.